It begins with a thought that feels almost unsettling. What if the story of Greek DNA, the genetic signature of one of the world's most influential ancient cultures, doesn't end at the Mediterranean's edge? What if its path stretches far beyond the blue waters we picture when we think of the ancient Greeks, extending into the mountains of India, the plains of Central Asia, and even the Atlantic shores of Iberia? For generations, we've been taught to imagine the Greek world as a cultural island, brilliant, self-contained, rooted around the Aegean. But DNA paints a different picture, one that refuses to stay inside maps or historical timelines. Because Greek ancestry, as it turns out, has traveled farther, survived longer, and influenced more people than anyone expected. The journey begins thousands of years before the Parthenon, before Plato, before the cities of marble and myth. It begins with movements of people, families, tribes, whole communities who carried with them the earliest seeds of what we would one day call Greek culture. Human populations in the ancient Aegean were never isolated. They were sailors, traders, wanderers, people connected not just to one another, but to the wider ancient world. And their DNA reflects it. When geneticists began comparing ancient Greek genomes with those found across Eurasia, the results were so wide-ranging that they forced researchers to rethink almost every assumption about where Greek influence began and ended. The first big surprise came from the East, because buried in the genetic record of parts of India, especially in regions touched by ancient migrations and Indo-Greek kingdoms, lies a faint but unmistakable echo of Mediterranean ancestry. Not modern Greek, ancient Greek. Fragments of DNA that appear in the wake of the campaigns of Alexander the Great, the settlement of his soldiers, and the Hellenistic rulers who blended Greek and South Asian worlds in ways historians are still piecing together. And yet, the imprint is older than even Alexander. Some of it reaches back to shared Indo-European roots, when populations split and migrated thousands of years before written history. Others appear in elite warrior lineages, scholar families, and communities along ancient trade corridors that connected distant lands long before borders existed. Travel westward, and the story becomes even stranger. Across Italy, southern France, and Spain, especially near the Iberian coast, the genetic signature associated with Bronze Age Aegean populations appears more frequently than expected. Not dominant, not overwhelming, but present, a quiet thread woven into the genetic fabric of the Western Mediterranean. Some of it comes from maritime trade during the Greek colonial period, when sailors from Corinth, Athens, Ionia, and Rhodes settled small ports, built trading posts, and slowly shaped local populations over centuries. Some comes from interactions long before that, during the Bronze Age, when Minoans and Mycenaeans were in constant contact with Iberia through tin routes, copper trade, and shared seafaring traditions. And then there's the influence carried through Rome, because Rome absorbed Greece culturally, intellectually, and genetically. And when Romans brought Greek scholars, teachers, artisans, and families westward, they carried Greek genes with them, leaving faint traces from Portugal to Morocco. None of this suggests that Greeks replaced local populations. They didn't. These were small contributions, subtle layers in the deep ancestry of millions of people. But the fact that these traces exist at all, from India to Iberia, shows just how interconnected the ancient world really was. Zoom in on the data, and you begin to see patterns. In Central Asia, clusters of DNA resemble populations known to be formed during the era of Greco-Bactria, a hybrid world where Greek settlers intermarried with local communities. In the Levant, Greek ancestry appears in port cities shaped by centuries of trade and Hellenistic administration. In Egypt, it shows up during the Ptolemaic period, a time when Greek and Egyptian cultures fused so deeply that their identities became inseparable. Greek DNA became a traveler, carried not just by conquerors, but by merchants, nomads, scholars, families, and migrations lost to written history. What makes the story powerful is that it reminds us of something easy to forget. Cultures do not move in straight lines. They ripple, blend, fracture, reform, and reappear in places where no historian expected to find them. Greek culture gave the world philosophy, mathematics, drama, astronomy, architecture. But its people, the carriers of that culture, were not confined to the borders of any empire. They moved, and wherever they went, a part of them stayed. Today, when geneticists map the ancient world, they see Greece not as a closed chapter, but as a crossroads, a place where Europe, Asia, and Africa met, mixed, and reshaped one another. And that global footprint is still visible. If you travel across the Mediterranean, through South Asia, or along the Atlantic coastline of Europe, you can find faint echoes. Not enough to transform identities, but enough to show connection. A shared ancestor here, a haplogroup cluster there. Small reminders of a world far more interconnected than we once believed. We often imagine ourselves as rooted in fixed places, fixed cultures, fixed stories. But DNA tells us something more dynamic, that ancestry is a map of movement, not boundaries. That the Greeks were part of a broader network of migration stretching across continents. And that their genetic legacy, like their ideas, wandered far beyond their homeland. From India's ancient trade cities, to the deserts of Bactria, to the quiet villages of Iberia, Greek DNA traveled silently through time. And today it reveals a truth history books rarely tell in full, that the world's civilizations were never isolated. They were connected by currents of human movement, some small, some immense, that shaped the people we are today. The story of Greek ancestry isn't only about where the Greeks came from. It's about where they went and how far their footsteps carried them. Not just across the Mediterranean, but across the world. If you enjoyed this, subscribe to Genealogy X.